This podcast is supported by Secretly Society, a record club offering the best new albums in exclusive, limited edition vinyl colours, delivered to your door each month, with perks like free shipping, members-only discounts, and first dibs on rare finds. Secretly Society is a record club for new collectors and crate diggers alike. Sign up and become a member wherever you are in the world. Just head on over to secretlystore.com. Hello, we're back for another episode of Secretly Frequencies, the podcast where we test labels on their knowledge of their own back catalogue and uncover the untold stories behind their musical histories. So far, we've done episodes with Secretly Canadian, Dead Oceans, and Jag Jaguar, but we're trying something a little different today. Instead of talking to a label, we're going direct to the source and grilling an artist themselves about their own songs. In the hot seat today, we have none other than Dead Oceans' Kevin Morby, a musician with a plethora of jewels to uncover. And I'm joined by my co-host this time, journalist and Morby megafan, Chris Catchpole.
Thanks, Tom. Yeah, very excited about talking to Kevin today. As a songwriter, he's been compared to Bob Dylan, Neil Young, Lou Reed, Patti Smith, so he's in pretty good company. Just in terms of the amount of music he's put out, there's been 7 solo albums in 10 years. So I think one of the things I'm quite interested in is, will he be able to sort of remember everything he's talking about, or we're pulling stuff up and asking me about it. So yeah, it should be a fascinating chat.
Kevin started his music releasing career back in 2005 as the bass player for the revered noise folk band Woods, and was involved in a number of their early albums released on the Woodsist label. He also released a couple of albums with a band called The Davies in the late 2000s as he started to prep what would become his first solo album, Harlem River. In 2016, Kevin signed to Dead Oceans and has been releasing solo albums and singles with them since, clocking up 5 albums in 7 years, as well as myriad other singles and projects.
So let's see if you can remember it all. Oh my God, here comes Kevin Morby. How's your day been so far?
It's been good. I'm training for a half marathon right now. So I ran this morning, which is good. Always wakes me up in a nice way. So yeah, I'm feeling good today.
When's the half marathon taking place?
It is May 20th, so it's at the end of this month.
And that's in Kansas, is it?
It's actually in New York. It's in Brooklyn.
Oh, you're doing the New York one, right?
Amazing.
Yeah, and just the half, so it's just all within Brooklyn. It starts at like Prospect Park and goes to Coney Island, which I'm really excited about.
Do you have a time that you're hoping to do it in? Or do you not want to say that out loud?
No, it's fine. Just under 2 hours. But what I'm worried about is that it's going to be really hot that day, and like all my training's being done in cold weather. So I'm worried that I'm just going to, get my ass handed to me that day.
Well, good luck. Shall we go ahead and hear our first song?
Let's do it.
Let's do it. Here we go.
I dreamt of the hell to come. If I didn't wake up and run, I was swimming in a pool of blood.
What song does Mess Me Around by the Davies?
They're gonna mess me around, Lord. They're gonna mess me around, Lord. Come on, mess me around, Lord. They're gonna mess me around. And he only drinks to control, but sometimes getting drunk just isn't enough. Gonna drink the water till the water is all gone. Gonna drink until the well is run.
So The Babies was the first time that you put out songs you had written or co-written, is that right?
Correct, yeah.
So what was happening in your life around the time that you put the Babies records out?
That time in my life, I was also playing in a band called Woods. And I joined Woods, and it was this big thing in my life. I ended up living in this house called Rear House with the other members of Woods. And I was a big fan of the band. And they asked me to join it as a sort of live member. And I was in the band for about a year, and I'd been on the road a lot throughout that year. And when I came back from a tour one time, I ran into my old roommate, Cassie Ramone, and Cassie had her own band called the Vivian Girls, which were also this band that were kind of ascending at that moment in time. And they're very influential, and they're a very amazing band. And we hadn't seen each other in a long time. Cassie just kind of said off a whim, she's like, we should start a band like that just plays house parties because we're on our way to a house party. The idea of the Babies was to be this. It's funny to think about now because I think Cassie envisioned the Vivian Girls and I envisioned Woods as like almost like our day jobs, like these big, huge bands that we were in.
Sure.
Even though the reality of it was that these bands weren't that big, but we wanted to create this thing that sort of was this vehicle to party, really. So that was the start of the Babies. And, you know, as things progressed, the Babies got a little bit bigger and bigger as time went by. And it was really neat to have this experience with Woods where I was a hired gun and I got to tour with them. And the Babies would really play New York as much as possible. I really feel like it's where I learned how to be a front person and being able to do it next to Cassie, who was so naturally charismatic and just her own sort of natural star. And she had been playing in the Vivian Girls for a couple of years and she'd been in front of these huge audiences, playing festivals and things like that around the world. It really was this safe way for me to start putting my music out there. I wrote a lot of the songs on the Babies records. It was more for my songwriting than Cassie's. She'd have a couple songs every record and we collaborated on a couple songs. It was sort of this way to start getting my songs out there in this capacity that felt safe and secure because I was doing it with her.
Both those Babies albums have got this wonderful sense of abandon, this sort of Velvet Underground clatter. As I say, it's interesting to hear you say this started out as a party band because that comes across on both records. Were you sort of thinking at the same time, formulating any ideas for what would become your solo career and what you wanted to do yourself?
It was interesting because the two bands doing Woods and the Babies at the same time, it was getting really exhausting doing that. And again, the Babies always felt like sort of a side project just because Cassie's main focus is the Vivian Girls. And because I was playing in Woods, we just didn't have that much time. I mean, it was just such a stressful schedule. I'd literally get home from like 6-week tours with Woods and have one day off and then go out with the Babies. As we got a little bit bigger and bigger each time, I had this feeling of, I think people are relating to this and they're connecting to this. And a lot of it is my songwriting. And so it made me feel like, well, if I can do this here, maybe I could start a solo career and I could put out solo records and not do either band. It kind of felt towards the end, it was just sort of, you know, we did more than we ever thought we would ever do, you know, and one of the last tours that we did was we got to play Primavera Sound in Barcelona.
Oh, wow.
And that was this huge deal. We did literally play to thousands of people and we never thought that would ever happen. And we went on the successful European tour after it. And it just kind of felt like Cassie's focus was a little bit elsewhere. I just started to realize, you know, I think people are relating to my songs and I can probably do this on my own. And maybe it's best if I do that and step away from both bands in this exhausting schedule and kind of just start my own thing and see where that takes me.
So would you say that was kind of the main thing you took from the project, the confidence to take your songs and just do it yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Woods taught me how to like be on stage and play with other musicians and what it was like to have a practice schedule and to really take being a musician seriously and to tour. And then the Babies really taught me how to stand in front of people as a front person. I played a lot of solo music growing up and in high school and stuff as Kevin Morby. And when I moved to New York, I felt like such a spectator. I felt like I was in the presence of all this greatness and everyone was better than me. And not in a bad way, but just in a way of, I felt like I couldn't do what these people were doing. And I was happy just to be there to witness what they were doing. I don't think I would have ever had the confidence to just suddenly say I was a solo artist in New York City and start trying to play my own show.
Sure.
So I would say, yeah, the confidence and the ability to sort of navigate the music industry is two huge things that I took away from both those bands.
Well, I feel that sounds like quite a good queuing up point for our next track.
If you knew the depth I'd wander or measure that hole that I'm in, if you knew just how far I travel, then, maybe then, only then,
So that was from your debut album, Harlem River, Miles, Miles, Miles. Does that feel, it's 2013, does it feel like 10 years ago to you?
It does. It feels a long time ago, but also like yesterday. I know that's a cliche, but it really feels like both of those things. And yeah, that's a very, very nostalgic record for me.
I mean, Harlem River, I suppose as the title would suggest, in many ways, was it kind of a love letter to your time in New York?
Yeah, absolutely. The thing with that record was, you know, it was a big deal for me to quit both of these bands. And I wouldn't say I quit the Babies. The Babies just kind of broke up, essentially. But I had to quit Woods. And Woods felt like this sort of like meal ticket for me, or it's like it was my keys to the world, you know. I was like, well, if I give this up, I may never have that opportunity again. I remember I was in France at a festival called La Route de Rock with Woods. There was like a free masseuse, like massage table in the backstage.
Wow. That's French festivals for you.
Yeah, exactly. I never heard of such a thing. But I remember getting this massage backstage and I was thinking, you know, I may never be getting a massage backstage in France ever again if I do this and no one ends up liking my solo music. So it really felt like something I had to do. I was just about to turn 25 around that time. And New York, you know, it played such a pivotal role in my life. It's my first adopted home ever. I moved there almost right as I turned 18. It feels like home when I'm there. And so it's a huge place in my life. And as a part of my story, it felt like the scene that I'd been a part of, which is like this sort of DIY scene that revolved around a couple of like DIY venues. And I felt like my scene, my little like corner of the scene at least, was starting to die. So I wanted to move to Los Angeles because at the time, LA was so much cheaper than New York.
Wow.
And it was so, in 2013, you couldn't get anyone to move to LA. It was like this really funny thing. And everyone that I told that I was moving there looked at me like I was crazy. I was able to get me and Justin, the drummer of the Babies, who then ended up playing on a lot of my solo records. We moved there together and we were able to get this place for really cheap and we could practice in this sort of big apartment that we had. And we had all our gear in there. And it just felt like a place where I was like, okay, I want to go solo and I want to make these solo records. I'm going to need to live in a cheaper place to do it. And I want to throw everything I have into music and try to not have a day job. So my good friend Rob Barbado had made the Babies album, and I had a really great time making that record with him, the last Babies album, Our House on the Hill. And it had been the first time I'd ever been in a proper music studio or worked with a proper producer. And I found that whole process so fruitful. And I knew that I wanted to do this solo record with Rob, and I knew that he was down to do it. I had this collection of songs, and yeah, I was kind of framing it as like, these are songs that I've written in New York City over the years. I've left there and I've moved here, and I want to make a statement about that. I remember telling Rob that I wanted to just have it be me and acoustic guitar. And Rob said this funny thing. He was like, you can make that record, but not with me. But if you're going to make a record with me, I'm going to get like an amazing band together and we're going to like really do this thing. And I remember having this resilience to it, which I can't imagine now. Even hearing that little snippet, there's so much of this band and Rob's vision alongside my vision in that record. We made it over a couple of different weekends at the studio that Rob was working at, doing some sort of commercial work. We'd kind of sneak in there on the weekends and we made this record really quickly, and he assembled a great band. And yeah, it was just an amazing time in my life. And it was also this big time in my life because I was leaving my adopted home to another new adopted home, and also leaving my bands, you know, doing the thing where I've gone all the way out west and I'm beginning this whole new chapter in my life.
So when you had the band in the studio, was that the same group of musicians that you took out touring that first record with you, or did you put a new band together? What was your touring setup around that time?
It was a similar thing. So on that record, there's a guy named Will Canzoneri who's playing keys, who's a very talented key player. He plays in Vampire Weekend now. And then there was my friend Tim Presley played bass, and Tim has always been sort of a hero of mine and one of my best buds and just a musical inspiration. He has a band called White Fence, and he's also in a band called Drinks with Kate LeBon. Tim is like a phenomenal, amazing guitar player, and him and Rob had been in a band called Dark of My Love, and they're like brothers. Rob called him in to play bass, which I thought was such an interesting move because Tim's, you know, this incredible lead guitar player. I learned that if you put like an amazing lead guitar player, if you put a bass in their hands, they just play. It's basically like they just solo on the bass the whole time. If you listen to Miles, 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 it's this crazy bass line. You kind of can't even follow it. And that's Tim. And it was super fun. And I remember just being super excited that Tim was going to be a part of it. And then Rob is on guitar. And then Justin Sullivan, who played in the Babies, he's on drums. And that was the band. And I mean, you know, Rob had a vision. I remember he brought in the Daradorian sisters, Angel Daradorian and her sister. Angel was playing in Dirty Projectors at the time. And that was such a cool thing. And then Kate LeBon I had met out there like right as I moved to LA, she had moved there around the same time. And we met at this sort of awkward industry party. And we ended up talking and connecting, and a great everlasting friendship came out of that. And so she came and sang on the record, and that was such an amazing thing for me. And then she ended up taking me out on the road for my first ever tour. And I'm forever in debt to her for this tour where, you know, she just had me get in the van with her. It was me and Justin. And then Q, who goes by H. Hawkline, was playing in her band at the time, and he played bass in my band when we were on the stage. And then Will Canzaneri was playing bass in her band, but he sat in with me playing keys. That tour for me, you know, her doing that and like getting me out on the road effortlessly, you know, I didn't have to book anything. I was able to just jump in a van with her and go and do it. That was a huge deal for me and really got the wheels turning for me.
Awesome. Shall we hear the next song?
Oh no, there goes my head, there goes my head.
This is Black Flowers off of Singing Song.
Throating on in the swear jar, in the swear jar. Outside, storms cry. Inside now, not much better, stormy weather. I am writing a songbook on a mountain. In the garden where we built a home, black flowers.
So this was your debut for Dead Oceans. Yeah, how did you connect with Phil, who runs Dead Oceans?
So after Harlem River came out, I had another record kind of ready to go that I also did with Rob and with Justin and with Hugh from H. Hawkline and a couple other people. And so after Harlem River came out, it did okay critically, and I feel like a very small circle of people appreciated that album, one of whom is Phil Waldorf, who has built the empire that is now Dead Oceans. And Phil had reached out to me, and it was when he was living in Austin, and I wasn't aware of what Dead Oceans was at the time. And what's funny thinking about this time in my life is you have to understand I was coming off of DIY, and Jeremy from Woods, who runs Woods' Records, which is a very DIY operation, he put out my first two albums. There was a time there, especially in New York, where if you're in a DIY band, anything beyond that was very lame. You know, people were like, I'm not going to sign to Jaguar. Like they've got like employees, you know, it was like this thing. And like their bands play like actual venues. That's lame. Coming from that world, I remember like Saddle Creek and Phil had reached out, and I remember being perplexed that like anyone of a sort of higher caliber would even want to put out my music. I was the same way about all this stuff back then. Like the idea of having a manager was absolutely insane to me, where it was just like, why would anyone have someone manage their stuff? Which is hilarious to think of now, because if I had to manage myself, I would slowly fade away. Phil reached out about Harlem River, and it was kind of this no-brainer in my mind of like, oh no, well, I'm going to do my next record with Woodsist, you know? As things were going along, you know, Phil, after the second record, he was like, hey, I love the new album. And like, again, if you ever want to get together, I would love to talk about someday working together. And it was actually on that Kate LeBon tour where I first met him, and we played in Austin, and Phil and I went and got a drink, and, you know, we immediately hit it off. And it was just kind of this thing of like, let's keep the conversation going. And maybe at some point this would make sense, but you know, who knows? As things started to progress for me, and I was playing a lot more gigs around Los Angeles, I actually started going to New York a lot too. I remember like going to CMJ, and I was getting a lot of gigs opening for people, and things just kind of naturally through a sort of word of mouth were happening a little bit for me. It kind of dawned on me like, you know, I think that this could be a good decision to sign to a bigger label for my third record. And there was a couple other labels offering, and I ultimately decided to go with Dead Oceans, and that's how it happened, and never looked back.
Was Singing Saw the first time you worked with Sam Cohen as well?
Yeah, it just seemed like everything was sort of changing around me, and I wanted to try new things. And Also around that time, I had gotten asked to do one of the first things that happened when I started working with Asia, my manager, is that her brother, Robin Pecknold, who sings for the band Fleet Foxes, he had gotten offered to sing at a recreation of The Last Waltz in upstate New York at the Capitol Theater. And he said no. So they asked Asia, the promoter. Robin couldn't do it for whatever reason. And Asia said, but I have this new artist. He would love to do it. And it's one of the first things that I ever did working with Asia. And I went there and did it. And Sam Cohen was the band leader of this huge ensemble, like a 30-piece band. There's like a brass band in it. And, you know, there's multiple key players. And I remember just sort of being blown away by Sam's sort of poise and just confidence of working with that many people. And around that time, Sam put out his first solo album, which is called Cool It. And he'd been in a couple of bands that are great bands. And I really love the production of his record. And I didn't even think about working with him, but it's actually Jeremy from Woodsist was like, what about Sam Cohen's record? That sounds really cool. What if he produced your next album? And I was like, you know what? That's not a terrible idea. And reached out to him and he was like, sure, produce, I guess. Yeah, I could be down to produce someone else's work. Let's do it. It was one of those things where I was like, okay, like, there's Sam and there's maybe a couple other people I might like to work with, but let me do a couple trials with a couple people and I'll go to Sam first and I'll go work with them for like 4 days and just see what we get done. And at the end of the 4 days, we'd basically finished Singing Saw. And, you know, going into it, I thought maybe we'd get a couple songs done or something, but we immediately hit it off creatively and otherwise. And Sam just called in a bunch of different musicians and I kind of sat in a chair with an acoustic guitar and he built this world around me and it was really fun. And I'm really grateful for that record.
Wow. Do you tend to record records quickly or was that one a real unique one?
That was a unique one. That was uniquely fast. I've recorded other records that quick too. And there's records that take months and months and you have to just keep chipping away at. And then there's records that are just 4 or 5 days and they're done.
I do love this idea of you going up and performing, obviously, for any listeners unaware, The Last Waltz, the band's final concert at Winterland. I mean, how did that work? Who are you doing?
It was just some song that the band sang themselves, like the very, you know, it's like a 3-hour performance and there's like the second or third song or something. But I did get asked back years later, like 4 years later, I think in 2018, I got to go do the Dylan, which was really cool.
Oh, wow.
Fantastic.
You know,
Is it hard when you're doing something like that not to go full Bob as well?
Totally, yeah, for sure.
Should we have the next track?
Let's do it.
Let's do it. Pearly Gates, right?
In my time of sorrow, do you have a song that I could borrow? All mine are worn out now, dead and falling out in my mouth, yeah. I need a melody, something I could sail away on. I need a song to sing.
Yes, so that was Pearly Gates from 2017, the album City Music. That was quite, you know, a change in sound from Singing Saw.
Yeah, I went to my first sort of like label dinner with Phil and John Coombs. I remember they were asking, you know, like, what are your plans? What do you want to do if you sign with us? And I remember very confidently saying, I have 2 albums. You know, I have one's a sort of more folky, Laurel Canyon leaning album. And then one is the sonic opposite where its influences all come from New York City and it's more Patti Smith and Television and Velvet Underground. And that one I want to call City Music. It's ironic because I made Singing Saw in New York, but I did make it upstate. And, you know, Singing Saw, I was living in this neighborhood called Mount Washington at the time that is sort of this Laurel Canyon-y vibe. And then I made it in Woodstock, which is also, it fits that vibe. But I made City Music with my live band at the time, which was Justin Sullivan, once again, and Meg Duffy, the mighty Meg Duffy.
Yeah.
Hand Habits is their project. And so we were a trio at the time, and we'd been on this long tour actually through England, and we'd had this like miserable time where like there was a tragedy in one of our families, and then my friend passed away back home while we were on that tour. The airline had lost my clothes for the whole trip. It was just like this terrible, terrible time, and we were all just out on the road. As hard as touring can be, it can also really, you know, especially through tragedy, it can bring you together. So we did this 3-week like schlep, and we were kind of working out a lot of these songs collaboratively that were on City Music. We'd worked a couple of them out in the practice space ahead of the tour, but also was a lot of like sound check working on stuff or backstage working on stuff. And in terms of my records, this was the most sort of like a band. I remember, as shitty as that tour was, I wanted to sort of do like a band vacation where when we got home, I knew about the studio. It's called Panoramic Studios and super, super beautiful. A lot of amazing records have been made there. But I was like, let's go record these songs and like make this record. And let's book a week up there and kind of have it be like a band vacation. And it's funny that it's called City Music because we made it in such an idyllic place. Deer running through the yard, and you can take like outdoor showers, and it's foggy in the morning, and you watch the tide roll, and it's really, really beautiful. It's really cool. So, me, Justin, and Meg, and our friend Drew Fisher, who I'd worked with a lot before, we went up there and just kind of had this like really beautiful, I think only a week of tracking all those songs, and it was really collaborative and really great. My friend Meg Baird came in and did some singing, who we just toured with, and she's amazing, and her voice is so beautiful. She's such a beautiful person, and so it was great. And we were super busy because Singing Saw was out and doing well, so we're just always on the road. And I kind of had these songs in my back pocket that were now recorded. And the more I listened to them, as much as I love them, I was like, these are great, but they kind of need something else. They need some sort of something to spice them up. And I was a huge fan of Richard Swift. I never thought, that I would be able to work with him, because in my mind, he was just this like recording god, that like I would be untouchable. But I ran into him at a restaurant in LA. He's with Chris Swanson. We immediately hit it off, and just one of those things where I was like, I'm just going to shoot my shot. And I was like, I'd love to work together someday. And he's like, oh, let's do it anytime. And I was like, if you're being serious, like I'm very serious. In fact, I have this record that's already tracked, and I would love for you to, mix it or maybe even play on it. And he ended up doing both of those things. And I ended up going up to Cottage Grove, Oregon, where he lived, to National Freedom. And we worked on the record for a week, and we recorded one song, just the two of us. And he added a lot of stuff, and he had a lot of harmonies, and he played like second drums on a lot of tracks, a lot of synth, and it was amazing to work with him.
It's amazing how much Swift seems to pop up in a lot of artist stories, really. He is quite one of a kind, really, wasn't he?
One of a kind, and it was really amazing and wild to see his process. And, we kept in good touch and remained good buds up there till the end. And I love the dude a lot, miss the dude a lot. It is one of those things that sometimes it's really hard for me to listen to music that he's worked on, just knowing that he's not around anymore. And it's that, when they say the world gets a little bit dimmer when someone that shines bright dies, it's that sort of thing where I'm like, it pains me to think of the work he would have probably gone on to make, and he was amazing.
Yeah, truly sad.
I do also love the idea that you made this album that sounds like you're on the Lower East Side, and you're actually in this bucolic fantasia with deers skipping past the window at the time.
Yeah, it was funny. It's funny to think about that. And a lot of that record was sort of fictional too, because when I was writing Singing Saw, that was very autobiographical. And I was in a relationship at the time and living with the person and in Mount Washington. And all these songs sort of came from that time and place in my life. And then I sort of had this fictitious, I almost saw it as a songwriting assignment. Like, okay, I'm here and I'm writing these songs surrounded by these things. Let me like mentally go to this other place, go to New York City and write songs from someone else's perspective. And I had this whole character that I came up with, who her name was Mabel, and she was kind of this recluse. There was this article in the New York Times around that time about this sort of reclusive man. They had found his body, 3 weeks after he had died, and he died in his apartment. And this article is all about being like alone and isolated in such a populated place. I thought that was really interesting. So I kind of wrote from the perspective of that, like being alone in a crowd was really what I was getting after, with that album. And as well as a sort of love letter to New York, as well as a sort of wanting to create just this sort of fun city energy in music.
Do you like to sort of set yourself songwriting tasks? Is that your general process? Do you write songs every day? How do you go about it?
I always think to write from the perspective of someone else is very fruitful and yields great results. There's definitely the times where I sit down at a piano or with a guitar in my hand, and I'm like, I want to tell a story that's very much me, or that's very autobiographical or very open and emotional. But just as much as I like to write that, and again, that'd be like a record like Singing Saw, or maybe, a record like This Is a Photograph. Then there's times where it's like, I like to write from a completely different perspective and as if I'm somebody else. And basically I'm writing fiction. I find that just as interesting. And I kind of like to pivot between the two.
And also as a songwriter, you can still bring yourself in, you're writing from another character, but as you would if you were a novelist or writing a short story, you're still bringing your own experiences and your own inner self towards this other character that you're writing for.
Yeah, absolutely. And, it's funny. I've heard Rick Rubin talk about this a lot. And it's one of those things that when I heard him say it, I was like, I do that all the time. I totally agree with that. If you give yourself the assignment of like, I'm going to write a song in the style of Prince is the example that he used in this podcast I heard him do. Like, what would Nina Simone write? Or like, maybe this sounds bad when I'm singing it, but if Nina Simone sang it, would it be good then? And I have moments like that give me that sort of extra confidence. And I'm literally envisioning the song in their voice. One time I listened to Billy Joel give this interview. Not that I'm a big Billy Joel fan at all, but he says this thing that I found so relatable where he said, Piano Man, he literally in his mind was like, I'm writing a song for Bob Dylan that I'll sell to Bob Dylan. Next time you listen to Piano Man, just envision it in Bob Dylan's voice. That's what I was hearing. And that sort of mental gymnastics I do all the time. And it is true. You can sing me a song, you're the piano man. I'm like, oh, I can totally hear him. He's like, but then I just sang it. It was a Billy Joel song. And I really relate to that.
This is a really good segue. So we're going to hear track 5 now.
The Dark Don't Hide It by Jason Molina, Songs Ohio.
Something held me down and made me make a promise that I wouldn't tell if the truth forgets about us. Saying it now comes easily after finding out how you've been using me. At least the dark don't hide it.
That was Kevin Morby and Waxahachie cover of the Jason Molina song, The Dark Don't Hide It. So why did you choose that song?
We chose that song as well as Farewell Transmission. Katie and I had done a tour. Katie is now my romantic. As I said, I'm on her computer right now and something popped up. It just said Katie as if I had planned that. Katie and I had done a tour together at the beginning of 2017. She is my romantic partner. She is my better half. And at the time we were not dating, but we did this tour together and we really just bonded over everything. A lot of music stuff, a lot of music bonding. And one of the biggest artists that we were bonding over was Jason Molina and Songs Ohio. And it just sort of seemed to be this thing that was soundtracking our early days of falling in love. I think the thing with Jason Molina that's so interesting, I really think that he's one of these people who is just generationally going to get more and more fans. And I've seen this, like MJ Linderman, I think is a great artist to point to, or that band Wednesday. There's, bands that are getting notoriety now who are talking about Jason Molina as one of their songwriting heroes. And it's so cool to see these younger generations that are 10 years younger than me, and I'm 10 years younger than, Jason Molina would be. I really think that he's one of those people who I think it's only going to get bigger and bigger for Jason Molina. Unfortunately, he's not here to sort of reap those benefits, but we're listening to a lot of Jason Molina. It felt like he was an underappreciated artist, and it's like, let's use our platform to cover him and help spread the wealth. These are like the best songs ever. This is like discovering Harvest by Neil Young, but a lot of people haven't heard it or something.
Totally.
So let's start playing these songs live. And that's how it came about. Was we started playing one of the songs while we're on this tour together. I think we're playing as an encore. And we're like, let's record it, and let's record Farewell Transmission, even though it's going to be the hardest song to ever get right. And I mean, nothing will ever even come in the same stratosphere as touching his version, obviously. We did our best, and I'm proud of it. And we had this kind of great weekend where Katie and I rented an Airbnb, rehearsed the songs a bunch of times, and then we went in and we did it with Cyrus Jangris, and who plays in my live band, and Meg Duffy and Nick, and recorded those songs. It was great, and it became a benefit for Music Cares,
right? Yeah,
which helps musicians in need, which is a great cause, great organization.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you and Katie play a lot of music together at home?
We do, kind of. I mean, it's funny. I feel like we're always pivoting between, we're both musicians, and because of that, we're showing each other songs, or we're covering songs together, or we're like, okay, we don't want anything to do with music. We want to just be a couple and like watch basketball or something, anything but music. So it's always going back and forth between the two. But yeah, we do a lot of stuff when we join each other on stage, which happens pretty frequently. We like to cover songs then as well. And we've covered Jason Molina. We've covered Dark Don't Hide It. It's probably one of our most covered songs that we do together live.
I mean, as a music fan as well as a songwriter, what is it about Jason's music that initially that spoke to you when you first heard it?
You know what's funny is that for the longest time I didn't get it. It's the same thing happened with the Velvet Underground. The first time I heard them, I was like, I don't quite understand this. It's strange. Like there's a strange. It's like mustard. It's like the first time I had mustard, I was like, I don't know. It's kind of sour and weird. Who would want to eat this? I'd rather just have ketchup. 3 weeks later, you find yourself thinking about mustard. You know, it's one of those things. That's how a lot of my favorite bands, I guess, acquired tastes is what you could say. The first couple of times I heard Jason Molina, I remember thinking, oh, this just sounds like atypical indie rock or something, or it's too indie, or I don't know what my fucking problem was really. There was a moment in my life, I was on a European tour, and my tour manager over there, Boss, shout out to Boss, he put on Magnolia Electric Company, and I was like, what is this? And he was like, it's Songs Ohio. And I was like, this is the best thing I've like ever heard. It's like, I think of Jason Molina in specifically that record as Neil Young caliber, as Townes Van Zandt caliber, as someone, you know, I think Townes Van Zandt is such a good comparison because they're two people that I think there's two types of songwriters. And I feel like there's people who can sing about others who can touch the other side. And there's people who can touch the other side. And to be one of those songwriters who can touch the other side is a dangerous thing. You know, I think it takes a certain type of destructive person to be able to dance with death in that way, I think. And in Townes Van Zandt's like that. And I think Jason Molina was similar to that. They can just touch on something that a lot of other songwriters can see that they're touching it, knowing that we're not going to go there or that we can't touch it. I'm willing to go about like 90%, but like, damn, you got there and you brought this thing back from the other side. And now we have this unbelievable record.
Shall we
Cue up our next number?
yeah.
Dear God, please forgive me. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry.
Dear God,
I never have to do
please
this.
forgive me. I'm so
And
sorry.
then,
I'm so
dear
sorry.
God, please
I'm
forgive me.
so sorry.
I'm so sorry.
I'm so sorry.
This is this is Congratulations off of Oh My God. Yeah.
Congratulations, congratulations, you have survived, oh, you stayed alive. This life is a killer, but oh, what a ride, just to wake up each morning.
Yeah, so again, on Congratulations, Oh My God, it's your fifth album. You were working with Sam Cohen again. Did you guys have sort of a different approach when it came to starting this album?
Yeah, big time. You know, that was our second record that we did together. And I felt like every record up until that point, I had a pretty solid vision for it. And Oh My God, I had somewhat of a vision. It's one of those records where I knew that I wanted the title to be Oh My God, but I wasn't exactly sure the sonic palette that I wanted to choose for it. And I remember the first session I went in with my live band at the time, which was again, Meg Duffy and Cyrus Jangris and Nick Kinsey on drums. And we went in and we cut a couple songs that they were cool songs, but it just wasn't working. And then, you know, we did another session that was just me and Sam and Nick on drums. And we ended up stumbling into the first song we ended up doing was No Halo, which is the second song on the record. And I had played it on a guitar. I had written it on a guitar. And almost in that way I was speaking about earlier with Harlem River and Rob Barbado, I was like, I want the song to go like this. And Sam was like, what if we play it on a Wurlitzer? And what if like this beat drops in? And Sam really helped guide this thing where suddenly we were like, wow, we don't know what this is. This is like a whole new sonic territory. Let's run with this. And that became Oh My God. And, you know, I knew I wanted it to be sort of this secular religious album. I wanted to have a choir, and it was going to be a lot of songs about my relationship or non-relationship with religion. You know, I'd written a song called Beautiful Strangers that had come out the year before I started working on this song. And in that song, there's this sort of refrain that I have where I say, oh my God, oh my Lord. And it all kind of stemmed from that. It's almost like that one song spawned a whole record. That chant, that sort of mantra like, oh my God, oh my Lord, then sent me into this territory where I wrote a whole album kind of based around that. And it's definitely a peculiar record, and maybe this is a good time for my Phil impersonation, but like I remember when I first sent it to Phil, at first he was like, I'm a little confused by this record. I think I like it, you know? And then he spent another week with it and he was like, it's your best record yet. He's like, Kevin, you've
Oh,
I can't do a Phil. I feel too on the spot. But I feel like he was like, Kevin, you've written your Wowie Zowie. Which is, you know, like the Pavement record, Wowie Zowie, which is kind of, you either love or hate that Pavement album.
Yeah.
And I feel like it's the same thing. I knew going into Oh My God, I wanted it to feel like you were inside of a museum where it was very sort of stark and it was like black and white and there was a lot of light and a lot of darkness. And I wrote a lot of that record and a lot of the lyrics while in airplanes. I was traveling a lot and I had this whole idea of being above the weather and being above the clouds and also like the sort of starkness of an airplane and like everything felt sort of super clean, but also kind of uncomfortable and kind of made a record in that space and wanted it to sort of be challenging. And I knew going into it, you're going to love it or you're going to hate it. I took my shirt off on the album cover because I didn't want it to be dated in any way. And that sort of felt religious to me. I also, like when I was looking back at the album photos, I was like, this is absolutely insane, but like, let's just do it. Let's just go for it. This is absolutely a crazy album cover. And sometimes I look at it, I'm just like, it's like one of those laughs where you're like, that's hilarious. I'll be in a record store and I'm like, for the rest of time, there I am. It was a special record to make. And there was a lot of searching involved and, a lot of Sam and I together in the studio searching. And I think we came up with some really cool stuff. And, I'm proud of that record. That's his daughter, Simone, at the beginning of Congratulations, giving that sort of little bit. And it was a big record to take on, but it was super fun. And the touring around that album was the dawn of like this new style of band for me that's kind of continued since, where it's sort of this bigger band with, backup singers and saxophone and this E Street band, all out rock and roll show.
And again, I love this idea that almost like a project that you had the idea that you wanted this loose theme that you wanted to write about, and it predated the songs. And you're right, okay. I mean, do you find that be it a theme, a sense of locale or something? Does that give a project focus for you? Could you not the sort of person that would just be like, yeah, here's the 11 songs that I've written in this 2-year period?
I've never quite done that. Yeah, it's true. It's like I name the thing, and then I can create the world around it. It's like I knew that I wanted it to be called Oh My God long before 90% of that record was written. And I come up with a theme or I come up with an idea and then I see the finish line and then I have to get myself to the finish line. In fact, I would like to do a record like you were just mentioning someday where it's just sort of the best songs I've written from a period. I think that could be an interesting thing just because I've never done it.
Kevin, I saw that you put a post up a couple of days ago. We're recording this at the end of April, where you said, to all you Reddit cowards who said I say, oh my God, too much, this is a record where you can hear me talk about photos for an hour. Do you look yourself up online? Do you care about what people are saying on social media? I know you put that up as a joke.
Anyone who says that they don't look are lying. And I think it's just a matter of how much you do or don't look. I think some look more than others, but everyone looks. Everyone absolutely looks. For me, I'll look at everything. I mean, I won't look at everything. Actually, like a place that I don't look at like YouTube comments or something. I'm just bored by them. But I'll look at a Reddit, like I'll do like one of those Reddit AMAs or something. And then I'm like, oh, I'm on Reddit. Why don't I see, what else is going on here about my name? Yeah, comments don't bother me. And then, in terms of reviews, I feel like at this point, they used to bother me more. Oh My God is a great one because, Pitchfork gave it, they kind of dinged it. Whereas everyone else was saying, is my best record yet. So it was a confusing thing where I was like, what would be better? Everyone says it's kind of bad, but Pitchfork says it's great. Or everyone says it's like, it's great, and Pitchfork says it's kind of bad. But at this point, I feel like I have a healthy relationship with all of these things. There was a moment in my career where I was like, there's too much being said for me to keep track of all of it. And because I've built a solid fan base and I have a career, this is very much my career. And I'm no longer in the sort of like hustle mode of my career where I'm trying to just get the next gig or something. Like those things are all sort of in place. I don't care as much, I guess.
Is there any one particular thing that you've read which you thought that is particularly funny, like any one that's ever stuck with you that really made you laugh out loud?
That's the stuff a lot of it is really funny. I'm always down, you know what I mean? I have a good sense of humor. And like if someone says I sound like, Bob Dylan on like a virgin Bob Dylan on Quaaludes or something, I'm like, that's fucking hilarious. That's hilarious.
Stick it on the poster.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're going to hear track 7 now.
Mama, won't you
This is U.S. Mail.
write me a letter? Stick it in the U.S. mail. Mama, I do hope you feel
That's the
better.
4-track demo of US Mail. Original version on Sundowner. So this was released in the first year of the pandemic. Was it recorded in the pandemic as well?
I believe so. I believe that, yeah, I think so. And that song and all of Sundowner came about super quickly and was kind of written adjacently to Oh My God. So I was working on this. And again, this kind of goes back to the singing saw city music dynamic where I'm doing one thing. Therefore, like the other side of my brain wants to do the exact opposite. And once that's sort of established, it's easy to run with, because I'm like, all I have to do is everything I'm not doing on Oh My God, and Oh My God is we're not really using guitars and it's mainly pianos and gospel singers. And so, for this other one, I want to make a very small sounding record. That record happened really quickly. I bought a 4-track from an old friend of mine and I just moved into this house that I'm sitting in right now. I kind of had this big empty house to myself for the first time. I just moved from Los Angeles and was living here. And all my time that would be spent in this house would be in between tours or in between going to New York to work on Oh My God and do sessions there. So I'd be back here in these, I want to say, are almost songs I really didn't even ever think would see the light of day necessarily. I wrote all of Sundowner while wearing headphones, plugged into my 4-track, and I had like the reverb up. And, of course I was inspired by things like Bruce Springsteen's Nebraska
Right.
and Guided by Voices. The whole record felt sort of vulnerable and very private. And like I could just go into this other world, and hearing my voice come back through the warmth of the tape and the warmth of the machine kind of felt like it was someone else that wasn't me. And that kind of allowed me to go to a couple different lyrical or mental spaces that I found really interesting, and kind of just became this private secret project that I was working on in my downtime from these big parts of my life, which would being off the road or like in like an actual recording studio in New York. Then, suddenly I was like, I think I have a record. And again, it was one of these things where the phrase Sundowner kind of kept popping up in my life. And I was like, it's going to be called Sundowner. I'm going to write a song called Sundowner. These other songs really work within that theme. And, I started like sprinkling the lyrical content with these ideas of the sun setting or whatever. It was a really fun sort of like personal thing to work on. And again, I was like, I have another record sort of ready to go, ready to record it anytime. And I chose to do it with my friend Brad Cook, who he's been out there killing it the past couple of years. He's worked with Katie with Waxahachie, and he's done a lot of records. Mm-hmm. At the time, we never worked together, and I'd always heard about this amazing studio outside of El Paso called Sonic Ranch. And I knew because I was writing this record in Middle America, I wanted to record it properly, also in Middle America. So we went and we worked at a Sonic Ranch, and it was such a cool, perfect, couldn't have been more perfect for this album to do it down there. And this is a very quick one. And because I had written all these songs into my 4-tracks, it was kind of like all the parts were written, and Brad was a perfect producer because Brad's production style, people call him Coach Brad because he's almost more of like a coach than a producer in a way. I mean, he's a very talented musician, but like, for example, a thing that Brad did on this record was I played drums on these demos, and Brad gave me the confidence to play the drums in the studio, something I would never be confident enough to do on my own or perhaps with another producer. But Brad he built me up to believe that like I also have this other skill set, which is playing drums. And I'm so glad he did that, because I'm so glad that to have a record where, I can say I play drums on that song. That was a really amazing record, and it just happened so effortlessly. And it was almost like it was just, excuse for Brad and I to hang out for a week. And I love that album. It's very dear to my heart. And then those demos that we released are the songs that I sort of wrote in real time. You can hear them on that demos record.
And whose idea was it to put out these demos, the sort of sketches of the songs?
It was mine. I think for a while after I'd written them and recorded them, I was like, well, this is kind of the record. But I knew that I wanted them to be presented better than that, which is ultimately why I called Brad to help me do it properly. For what it's worth, that session we did in Studio A, or it's called maybe it's not called that. Maybe it's called the Neve Room. It's got this huge Neve soundboard at Sonic Ranch. We worked with this amazing engineer named Jerry. For what it's worth, it's the biggest studio I ever worked in, and it's basically just me in the live room. The live room is huge. It's humongous. And I'd heard that Bill Callahan worked in that studio. It really made me want to go there. But it's almost like this small little chapel-sized room. And it was so cool to be in there. And I took my pump organ, and I took an acoustic guitar, an electric guitar. Brad played bass. James Critchvinia, who plays in Big Thief, he came, and James ended up building maracas out of the studio is on 3,000 acres of a pecan farm, and James ended up.
Sounds amazing.
James came in and did some like crazy shit. He like literally was like, "Let's mic the floor. I'm gonna like slap the floor, and that'll be I want to put some floor slaps on a song, and I built these maracas out of these boxes and these pecan shells, and he plays some stuff like that, and it was just fun. It was just a really, really fun experience.
I mean, also, as I say, it's lovely having, as a fan, having that real intimacy. And it's great that you mentioned Nebraska, being it's got that quality to it. Is that something you'd think about doing with some other records you put out, kind of showing your notes?
Yeah, I love the demos. And, on This Is a Photograph, I've been rolling stuff out and I'm putting on a Substack, which has been fun to do. I do like sharing that sort of thing with the public. I think it's really interesting because I love demos myself. And there's a lot of releases that when the demos are released, I like them better than the originals. And I'm so grateful to have access to those. And recording an album and working with the producer and getting to go to a cool location to make music is such a life experience. And that's a big part of, why I'm in this in the first place, and like getting to go hang out with Brad. And I'm so glad that music can be a vehicle for me to do that. I kind of like to keep home recorded stuff as demos. I like going to studios.
Best of both worlds.
Best of both worlds. Can always release the demos and just let the people decide what they like better.
Should we have our next song?
Let's do it.
I know that I'm not perfect, just like I know you are wild. I know that though we're both grown up, I still feel like a child inside. And I
Stop
wanna
before
go
I
out
cry.
dancing soon as the world returns. 'Cause baby, when you're dressed up, well, it's hard to find the words. And if you look into my soul and you told me what you see, you'd say I see the mirror that you put in front of me. Oh, don't take me to the start.
From the recent
No, I
album,
want to
This
go
Is a
forward.
Photograph, that was Stop Before I Cry.
That is a beautiful, beautiful song that you've written very directly for Katie. I mean, was that something you were trying to do on this album? Was write much more directly?
Going through all of my albums, it's so funny that it all sort of ends in This Is a Photograph, or this part of my creative output. As I know, we just announced the continuum, more photographs. But This Is a Photograph for me, and I'm not just saying this. If someone were to ask me who never heard my music, where should I start with your catalog? I would honestly point to This Is a Photograph, because I think in terms of what I'm capable of what I'm capable with Sam, and what Sam's capable of, and what's representative of my live show, I think that this is the best place to look. And I feel like every other album has been almost a step to get here. And I love all my records like they're children. And it's like, I can't pick a favorite child, this one's got more attitude, but this one is really sweet, or whatever. But I think This Is a Photograph, I went into it sort of on a mission. I was like, there's obviously a theme with it, but it's the first record I wrote where there wasn't sort of a second record in my back pocket. I was like, I don't want to do that. I want to cut out all the fat. I want to cut out any other theme that might be in my brain. And I want to send all creative energy into this one thing. And I want this one thing to be my focus. And there's a lot of songs that I ended up not using. I knew that I wanted it to be 10 songs. I knew that I wanted it to be the best that it could be. I had a real vision and a real mission for it. And I think that Sam and I got there. I wrote most of it, the bulk of it, and recorded in and around the pandemic. So I knew that I also wanted it to be this record that felt very big. And because we've been spending all this time alone and had been this void of live music, I knew that once it came back, I wanted to be able to present this thing that was huge, bring a party to people and have a really good time. And so This Is a Photograph. It's the most focused I've ever been on one record. And, a lot of writing this record, I went to Memphis to work on it, and I was living in a hotel called the Peabody temporarily while I was writing it. A lot of those days were filled with doubt about the world in general, but also about my songwriting and just like, is this any good, or is there even going to be a world to present this to? And it was a crazy time, but I really pushed through it. And I think what came as a result of that is just sort of my most focused record. And this is one of those things, speaking of like reading stuff that's been written about me, I noticed sort of a lot of people were saying that this seemed like a record that was everything I was capable of, or everything up until now. Everything was represented. All the earlier records and each flavor of my brand of music is all on this one album. And that's something I was aiming for. And I'm glad people can recognize that.
I mean, you just mentioned earlier that the record has a very clear theme. Could you say a little bit about what that theme for you was?
There was a couple of themes going off in my mind at the time of writing the record. A lot of it had to do with my family. The song, the title track, This Is a Photograph, is quite literal in that it's about my father and it's about my mom, it's about my family, and it's about this health scare that my father had, but, luckily came back from. There's a lot about that. There's a lot about sort of dead celebrities, people that I looked up to. Jeff Buckley was someone's story that I was really following throughout this time and was really influential to me, especially, the bulk of my time in Memphis was sort of following this breadcrumb trail of his time in Memphis and his story, but also people that I never thought that would sort of influence this record ended up influencing, like the late, great garage rocker, Jay Reatard, Stax Records, anyone involved in that, Big Star, of course. Just sort of this lost idea of a certain type of America. But I think, the broad strokes it's really about the passing of time. And time was this big element on the album. And I think because it was written and recorded during COVID, time felt so strange and like goopy during that moment in history. It felt like time was super fast, but also super slow. And it really had drawn a line in the sand of like, pre-2020, life was just different. It wasn't without its complications. And, there's always been terrible things happening in the universe, but there's kind of never been this global problem on this scale till now. And it really had me reflecting on the past. And the past kind of became this safe place for me to exist in, whether I was thinking about, Jeff Buckley in Memphis in the 90s or my parents in Texas in the 80s or something far behind that. Also, there's an element to the record of wondering where time's going and what direction the world was moving in. And so it's all of those things and all of those characters are sort of represented. And yeah, it's really a record about time. I think, if I really had to choose one thing.
Speaking of time, we are starting to run out of it here. So we're going to move on to track 9.
Aha, Bill Fay, I hear you calling.
I hear you calling from the river bank. I will be coming.
That was I Hear You Calling, which is a Bill Fay cover from 2021.
Your label mates with Bill Fay as well. Is that someone
Yes.
you've been a fan of for a long time? Did you discover him through the Dead Oceans connection? What's your relationship with Bill there?
I've been a fan of him for a long time, and I knew him before Dead Oceans. Definitely a selling point for me to sign.
Right.
When you got Phil Waldorf being like, "We got Bill Fay," I love you so much, Phil. I love you so much. But yeah, that was a huge selling point for me, and I'm a huge fan of Bill Fay. Us and Woods. We listened to a lot of him in the van, and it's a little full circle ending on that song. Jarvis from Woods, Jarvis Tavernier, he recorded that song. It was a cool thing that we got to do together and collaborate in that way. And yeah, I've exchanged a few emails with Bill via Phil. He's such a songwriting hero, and kind of like what I was saying about someone like Melina. But you've seen the sort of generations tack on to his fandom, and it's really cool to see. And you see people like Jeff Tweedy, being obsessed with his songs. And it's so cool to just see all these people who, recognize and realize just how amazing his work is. And that song was a live staple for me around the time that I signed with Dead Oceans, which felt like a special thing and sort of a kismet thing. I was always playing I Hear You Calling out on the road, and I'm so glad that I got to do that one. And I love that song.
That's interesting that you say, because I was saying that it kind of, in terms of the sort of themes, the religious themes in that song that Bill uses, I think was it from 1971, the Roundabout Singing Souls, there's echoes for what you were doing around about that time.
Yeah, for sure. And it's funny, the chord progression is similar to my song Parade. And so I would blend those two. I'd kind of make this medley out of the two songs. And it's one of those things where it felt like very similar to my music, and that makes sense because my music is just so influenced by his music. So he's one of the great ones. I got to correspond with him a little bit. He said thank you, and he said something to the effect of, who knew that like a song I wrote in the 70s in a London apartment would make its way all the way here. And I think that's super special and super cool to think about.
Do you have a favorite cover version that someone else has done?
Nina Simone is the god of covers. You know, her record To Love Somebody is just, you know, it's got the Bee Gees cover, To Love Somebody. She does Just Like Tom Thumb's Blues by Bob Dylan. She does Suzanne by Leonard Cohen. She does another Dylan song on that I'm not thinking of right now. But, I Shall Be Released. And Nina Simone, because it's a very difficult thing. Like, as much as I love Katie and I's version of Farewell Transmission and Dark Don't Hide It, doesn't come anywhere close to the original. And I fully believe that. Nina Simone yielded the power to make a cover better than the original, which is very, very rare power.
Yeah.
You have to be a certain type of musician and just person, I think, to be able to pull that off. So I think, for what it's worth, her cover of Suzanne by Leonard Cohen is maybe the best cover of all time.
Okay, we've heard 9 songs. Kevin, what would be your track 10 of your songs that you would play?
You know what? Let's pick Bittersweet Tennessee, because my friend Erin Ray sings on that, and she does such an outstanding job. Let's go with Bittersweet Tennessee.
Devoted my life to the passing of time, crossed over county to the misery line, and how does one sail on the waves of time? Hey there, sailor, can I hitch a ride? There was a time when you were mine, oh, there was a time when you were mine, there was a time when you were mine, oh, there was a time. We'll have one on me, bittersweet Tennessee.
Thanks so much, Kevin. It's been a real pleasure.
Yeah,
to
thank
chat
you.
with
This has been awesome. Trip down memory lane. I love this.
That's it for this episode of Secretly Frequencies. You've been listening to me, Tom Davies, my co-host Chris Catchpole, and our guest, Kevin Morby. You can hear all the songs from today's episode on our playlists via the link in the show notes.
The Secretly Society podcast is an original production of the Secretly Group. This episode was produced and edited by Sarah Miles and executive produced by House of Hutch. Project manager for Secretly Society podcast is Mimi Gontar. Robbie Morris is the creative director. Look out for more from the Secretly Society wherever you get your podcasts.